It's the season of the witch. We had to do a part two because we woke up with so many more ideas and thoughts.
Yeah, Chipmunk literally stared into my soul for 3 whole minutes this morning in my morning practice. And I was like, we got to do a part two.
So I hope you enjoy part two. And remember, there is a show in New York City, November 1st, and in Toronto, the weekend of the 15th and 16th. All the information is in the show notes. Welcome to the Gnarly Girls podcast.
What's up, gnarly beings?
This is a loose-lipped, unfiltered, raw dogging, stripping down of culture.
No fucks, no panties. This is a labia of love.
We're your hosts, Tony Naj
and Serafina Supernova. And this is Gnarly Girls. Do you have blood teeth again? Yeah.
Blood on your teeth is a good way to start part two of getting wet for the witch wound. Who should we call in?
I think we need to call in Lilith again.
Mm-hmm.
Mother of demons, mother of dragons. And I also want to be open to information that I've never received before, not only about Lilith, but other feminine archetypes, witches, goddesses, ascended masters, whose stories have been bastardized and butchered for the benefit of the patriarchy, the church, the state, the state, and ultimately men.
Well, but I also want to remind us is that when things quote unquote benefit men, they also equally hurt men.
Right.
Because they are putting the masculine or male archetypes or the pressure on the masculine / male to be within this hierarchical situation where they're always seeking power and they're always seeking dominance. And I think we all know that when you are trying to have power over another person or dominate another person, you don't feel connected to them.
Yeah.
That's not a way of your hearts melding into one.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a way of isolating yourself and feeling really lonely.
Well, and, we sort of comically touched on Lilith's story in part one of this. And something I want to bring in again about her relationship to Adam was that he actually wanted to sexually dominate her.
Wait. Okay, when you say Lilith, you are also meaning Eve.
I'm also meaning
I think that needs to be very clear.
Yeah. In the Old Testament of the Bible, Eve comes from Adam's rib. It's said that.
Why is it Eve and Lilith?
It's said that Lilith comes from the same soil as Adam. And Lilith is more connected to specifically Judaism, while Eve is more of a Christian archetypal expression of this feminine energy in relationship to man and God. But in both stories, it's like Lilith comes from either the same soil as Adam or she comes from him. I think fundamentally what I was thinking about, and part of the reason why I wanted to do a part two of this, is if we're going to say that the witch wound is connected to the sister wound, then the original wound is the mother wound. Because how could you have the sister wound and the witch wound without ultimately this sense of disconnection and disrespect of the mother? Because when we look at both Eve and Lilith's story, the common denominator is that God is the father.
Okay, and so when we talk about Eve, when we talk about Lilith, this is the same feminine archetype, the same quote unquote witch archetype, just in different stories, but telling the story of the original woman, where Adam has the same name.
Right.
Adam is this Adam. Adam just gets to maintain identity. Right. But Lilith / Eve is like traversing through time and space with multiple names and identities and fawning and contorting and finding herself having to fit into the origami expectations of the story. She doesn't get to just be one whole person.
Right. Well, and and of course.
Or is she one whole person?
Well, that's a good question.
But we're equating the original woman, or you're equating, and I guess me through tangentially coming along on this journey, we are equating the original woman as the original witch.
Right.
So why are we doing that?
The original woman is the original witch because men fundamentally distrust women and are jealous of women and our ability to gestate create and birth life, and that they're only a part of that, but they're not the vessel. And I think that that is like so intentional in terms of the way that we look at God as the father and how God has been positioned as the masculine father archetype across religions and cultures, because we are disconnected from the mother, from the divine mother, and we can't have the witch wound and the sister wound without the mother wound. I just feel so clear that like the witch wound and the fact that we don't trust women is because we're disconnected from the mother. And so I do want to call on Lilith, and I do want to really like express that her rejection of Adam is because he wanted to sexually dominate her and control her, and she was not down for that shit. And in some retellings of her story, she's called the mother of demons. In some retellings, she is called a vampire. In Megan Watterson's depiction, who's a feminist theologian who loves all the goddesses and the ascended masters, and I highly recommend her work, she is the one who gave me the story about Lilith calling on Archangel Samuel, uttering the divine words, and then flying away to another dimension. But in other retellings of her story, it's actually said that God the Father sent all of these angels after her when she tried to flee Adam to convince her to come back to Adam. And she was like, no, I'm not doing that. And then in some traditions, it says that like she is like a killer of babies and the mother of demons. And she's actually this like dark sea creature. And like, I don't know. It's just like the way that women who claim their sovereignty, like they are labeled as dangerous and shit is talked about them, and their stories become a game of telephone because they were willing to be like, no, you can't control me.
Okay, so we are looking at the archetypal Eve slash Lilith as the first woman.
Yes.
And the first woman, one of her great sins was rejecting the sexual control of man.
And also the father, not just her man, but God the Father.
But there is this
who created
idea,
her for Adam.
who created her for Adam. So woman's purpose in this original story, where we are trying to reclaim woman's purpose as not coming from man, but as her own sovereign, autonomous being who is rejecting the idea that she is her only purpose in life is to serve man. Like, I think that is a witchy mentality to question the societal insistence that the purpose and value of a woman is to provide her body for a man. And I think that where things start to maybe like bristle or get uncomfortable, right, is it feels like a rejection of man.
Right.
And that's not it. To say I don't want to be controlled by a man, or I don't want to be a sexual slave to a man, is not to discard men. It's to actually insist on your own autonomy. And I think that is where a lot of people are getting the intentions twisted, right?
Yeah. I mean, we were like, what is a witch and what does she do? She rejects external authority. No one outside of her is going to be an expert on her body, what she needs, what's right, what's wrong for her. She is a self-governing entity, which is threatening to a system that seeks to keep us disempowered and codependent and bowing at the feet of not just men, but like, I just think it's so, we just really need to examine God as the Father and why that has been the dominant narrative that has been so infiltrated into the state, because there isn't a separation of church and state, especially in the United States. And this is like a thesis that I want to bring in for this episode, not to get too serious, but like if the witch wound is the sister wound, then ultimately the festering, like cancerous, like bleh, like primordial wound, I think is the mother wound.
All right. So when I think of AI, which is its own witchcraft, which is its own wizardry, because AI is the attempt to create life and consciousness. And so I've always thought of AI as a certain sense of a womb envy. And the intention behind these predominantly male scientists is to understand what it is to gestate and create and give life. Now, as we know, not all women are interested in giving birth, gestating, being a host for another being.
Yeah.
Yet, and or have the physical capacity. I mean, fertility is a huge issue.
Yeah.
But there is a certain womb envy that I do think science and religion has, because there is this confusion and fear around what is it to really create life, and why was that bestowed on half of us and not all of us? And there is a certain imbalance in that. That is true. And that is real. And I think if we're going to heal the mother wound and heal the witch wound, it's about fully opening up our hearts and our uteri and our womb and our vagines to the fact that that is a legit imbalance. And I don't know, from the depths of my soul, I don't know what it would be like to be a man. And I don't know what it would feel like to feel inferior because I cannot create life, because maybe the patriarchy is birthed from this feeling of deep inferiority of like, I don't know how to create life and then have it suckle off my teat and survive. And maybe that like feels incredibly vulnerable and scary. And so the patriarchy is a reaction to this deep like sadness.
Yeah. And the reaction is a rejection. The
Mhm.
reaction is a rejection. I mean, I've had a pretty intense couple days. I'm definitely going through a lot right now in my like personal inner mystery school realm. And I mean that with the most, no, I know. I'm just like going through a lot on like the interpersonal relational dynamic and just like my own relationship to myself. It's just like it's like yet another dark night of this. I'm just going through another dark night of the soul.
Always.
How could I be talking about Lilith if I wasn't going through a dark night of the soul? Like I literally was talking about yesterday having to be dragged down in order to like rise again. And I do deeply relate to that story of the Phoenix. Like you do have to become ash. You have to completely surrender and let go of everything that you think you know in order to let yourself be reshaped like clay. Like that ultimately, I think, is the crux of my spiritual practice, is like trusting life, trusting the divine enough to allow myself to be reshaped like clay. And I think that trust and that faith comes from this choice that I've made to center the goddess and the divine mother in my life. And like, you know, yesterday I was externalizing my own internal voice of distrust around my own ability to pray or cast spells, or this like representative, like collective voice. I'm like, well, I don't actually know. And like, I don't know. And then the way that we act like we don't know as a protectionism, just like, you know, this chipmunk today that I was making deep eye contact with in my morning practice, like it literally just froze for a solid 3 minutes and we like stared into each other's eyes. And I was like, oh, like it's freezing because it's trying to protect itself. Like, or animals literally will play dead to protect themselves from the predator, right? So how many times have I played dead in my life to protect myself from a perceived predator or threat? Okay, so as I've been going through this just towerish, what did I call it this morning in my journal? A tower torture chamber. That's what it feels like. As I've been going through this tower torture chamber, I have been all right. Like I've been like, all right, I'm really going to practice like surrendering this voice of my own anxiety and like seeing if I can like be still enough to like hear the voice of wisdom within me, to connect to this voice of like divine mother and like what she would say. But like, that is a practice that I just think it's not about mastering it, because I don't think like God, Goddess, Source wants us to become masters of these practices. I think there is something in like being in that like vulnerable childlike state of having to come to the altar and like open your heart and palms and just be like, I don't know, like work through me, move through me. Like, I don't want to be the goddess. I don't want to be source. I don't want that. I, in my practice, want to be able to not refer to an external authority, but to like devote myself to something that's larger than me that I believe created me. Okay, that's how I think I meet the mother wound. That was my point. I meet the mother wound through like surrender, devotion, admitting I don't know, and I also do know.
So when I hear you say like you want to worship the goddess, you want to worship the mother, all of these things, and I'm like, oh, I received that. And then I think back if I were to hear male or masculine be like, well, I just want to worship the bro. I want to worship the dude. I want to worship the God. And there is a judgment I have of that, or like, oh, he's missing out on something. And I do think there is something that we need to acknowledge about our relationship to our own bodies, our own gender, and what we identify with. And it makes sense that a masculine person would want to like defer to a male god, and a female, body person might want to defer to a female god. And a non-binary would maybe want to defer to a non-binary god. And I think in past traditions where there were many deities,
Yeah.
that is a little more open, although I'm not going to say that the past traditions of multi-gendered gods are not patriarchal, because that's not true. That's not actually the answer.
Right.
And I genuinely think it's like, if we're talking about the witch wound being deeply connected to the mother wound, I think it's about actually getting very honest and real about how deep and irreplaceable and I don't even want to, it's holy one's relationship is to their mother. And because it is so deep and because it is so irreplaceable, I just can't imagine how a father feels in comparison to that. I am a mother. My daughter has a father. They have a relationship that, my daughter and I will never have, but the deep bond I have with my daughter, because I grew her and fed her, it cannot be replaced. It cannot. And I think that has to be, it's like with that comes also a greater responsibility. Like this like deep responsibility. It's like, how many of us are so heartbroken by our mothers because we expect less of our fathers? It's not that our mothers were worse parents.
Yeah.
It's just that we expected more of her. Societally, we expect more of her. We are more broken. Like the mommy wound that we're talking about is deeper than the father wound, even though the father wound is incredibly also real. And there's so many studies on how people thrive, and people thrive more when they have dads in their lives. This isn't to discredit how important a father is, but it's to be real about the uniqueness of a mother. And again, we can mother each other. That's the other thing. It's like, you don't have to birth to be a mother.
Right.
You have to honor the mother inside of you. You have to honor the relationship. Like, how many mothers have adopted children, or they have a different sort of circumstance, or how many mothers mothered the children of others, or mother a partner, or mother the world, or mother animals. Like, the mother energy is within us all.
Yes.
The witch energy is within us all.
Yes. Yes. Something we were talking about yesterday after the podcast that we want to make clear from our own orientation is like, we don't believe you have to be a woman to be a witch. Like,
no, I know lots of witchy dudes.
Totally.
And witchy non-binaries.
Totally. And like, just because we are primarily centering like women with wombs and uteruses within this conversation, that does not mean that we don't have a very expansive definition of women. And
there's a metaphoric uterus and womb in us all.
Right.
And at the same time, like, it's because this metaphoric womb and this metaphoric, we all have estrogen. Every single human being has estrogen, and every single human being has testosterone. We both have these hormones in us. Like, I just think that we have to honor the hormonal soup.
Yeah.
That we all have, and then we have to stir it. And the wound is like not admitting, I think, how unique and what a privilege it is to connect to like the mother inside of you.
Yeah. And gender is a capitalist construct and blah, blah, blah. Like, please, like,
we know
this.
And you know this.
We're all approaching this conversation from that orientation. So let's just make that clear in case anyone's new to either of our energy. I really would love to prompt you around And I know you talk about this in your show. So if you want to just give like a shorter synopsis of this, and you have to come to Men Come Inside Me to really get the full gist of this. But I just think like if someone's made it this
Okay.
far into part 2 of this episode, I want to prompt you around what you know I'm about to
say this is that you cannot have birth without sperm. You cannot have gestation without the masculine. There is a partnership between these two things.
Yeah.
And I think there is this common joke where people are like, oh, the dude had to do splooge and then the woman does all the rest of the work and blah, blah, blah. However, that splooge is crucial. Like we are not
It's some
multiplying.
fertilizer.
We are not multiplying on our own. We are not dividing on our own. And I think that if it's like what I hope for with the healing of the mother wound is that we have to honor jizz as much as we honor gestation.
Yeah.
These are, and they are different efforts, but like they have to be equally honored. And I think what happens is that when you get like demeaned, you know, like there's so many women who've been so demeaned and so put down and so pulled down that there is this reaction to be like, fuck that.
Yeah.
Fuck dudes, fuck their jizz, fuck all of that. And then it just perpetuates the cycle. It's like if we want to be honored, we have to honor. If we want to honor the witch and we want the witch to be honored, what is the alchemy? What is the medicine? What is the spell that we do? What is the offering that we make in order to call in the respect, you know?
I mean, I'm just like hearing sovereignty, 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 just like ringing in my head. And I don't exactly know what that means, but I think like, okay, I see, look at me going to that, deferring to that voice. I don't know. I actually do know. What I know and what I feel and why I think I'm receiving that is because when we actually deeply honor our own sovereignty, our own autonomous choices, we, by extension of that, honor the sovereign autonomous choices of other people. I also think when we practice honoring the sovereign autonomous choices of people outside of us, it then also helps us honor our own choices. Like I think that is a feedback. I think sovereignty is a feedback loop.
Yeah.
And, you know, going back to Lilith and Adam wanting to control her and her being like, fuck that. And that kind of being the root of this.
Wanting to control her, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is he wanted to control her because he felt so deeply insecure.
Yeah.
That is the thing that like we have to keep looking at is that when someone wants to control you, when someone wants to dominate you, when someone wants to pull you from what they think is your perceived throne, it is because of their own feelings of feeling discarded, feeling useless and feeling insecure. And so it's like, then you make the other person feel what you feel.
Well, and then the Council of Nicaea and the Roman Empire had to take Mary Magdalene's Gospels out of the Bible and erase the Divine Mother because they were insecure and trying to win war.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the reality
insecurity
of
and inferiority.
Yeah, it's an inferior. That's when I go back to Elon Musk and the womb envy.
I know.
It's a feeling of inferiority. And it's like, they're like, well, you got penis envy. I'm like, I think a penis would be a delightful organ to plop around and to boop, boop, boop,
How
and a da,
fun.
da, you know? So if I can explore my own penis envy, I think it's important for men to also explore their own womb envy. I think this is what I keep kind of going back to, is that we need to make space culturally and in our personal lives for the men in our lives to have genuine womb envy, and then to be like, that is real and I honor that. And that must, and as like mothers, as friends, as wives, as whatever the hell we are to these men, it's like, if we don't let them express and feel their womb envy, how are they going to mourn it and grieve it? Like I have friends who have chosen to not have children. They do not want to have children. That is a choice they're making. They're not going to regret it. They feel great about it. They have beautiful lives, but there is a mourning that they go through, and they go through the mourning of letting go. And my friends who I feel like have talked to me about this the most, you know, it's like there is a death process, a doula process as a woman saying, I'm choosing not to have this life path as a mother. I completely want this life path. And yet there will always, or there is in this moment, not always at all, not always at all, but I'm going to also honor the like alternate timeline when I didn't choose this.
Right.
And have a bit of mourning.
Yeah.
And I think we allow that for women to have like a complex feeling of not giving life, right?
Oh, I'm just getting like, so many downloads about the witch wound, the sister wound, the mother wound also being connected to our rejection of grief.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our fear of grief.
You can be
Our fear of death.
Our fear of fucking death. And we need to
The witch represents death and life, but really, I mean, Lilith is the goddess of death.
And she also
She killed her relationship.
She killed her relationship to give birth to herself.
Yes, that is literally what she did.
Yeah. And
she baptizes herself.
Mm-hmm.
She fucks herself.
And that doesn't mean and even if you really like fucking yourself, that doesn't mean you reject fucking others at another point, but you gotta like fucking yourself. Like, I think part of witch archetypes, that is like worth embodying is a genuine pleasure in your own company and a genuine pleasure in your own self fucking.
Yes.
And a genuine pleasure with yourself in nature. And because when you really embody that, like, deep knowing of self-containment, that's when you can be a partner to someone and you're not looking for that partner to entertain you with rejecting you.
Yep.
I think that is a thing that like a lot of women have to look at, is like being turned on by being rejected, being turned on by chasing a dude, being turned on by a guy who's fucking distant and pushing you away.
Yeah.
Because that means that like he is reaffirming your own self-hate and you're using him as a tool to stab yourself in the heart over and over again so you can continue to hate yourself. And he is going to continue to push you away and be distant in order to be on your mind and in your heart so he doesn't have to get hurt by you. And that game will be played until we put down the chess pieces. And the only way you're going to be able to do that in relationship to men is by showing up with relationship to men with like a deep, full knowing of your own value and also an equal space for him to be an emotional, anxious creature who also has sadness of his own womb envy. And if you get the quote unquote ick by that, how is he ever going to allow himself to show that to you?
Yeah.
How is he ever going to heal that? How are you ever going to work through that together? If we can, it's like we have to let that space be for men or else they're going to keep fucking hating us.
Yeah. And I think like what you're bringing me to is like the opposite of sovereignty is codependency. And there is this practice, I think, when you start to really work with the witch where you have to make the choice in really high sensation moments not to defer to old patterns of thought, behavior, and action, where instead of picking up the phone to make the anxious phone call or whatever your habitual pattern is, like picking up the substance, whatever, it's like actually like having a conversation with the divine or writing in your journal or writing something and burning it or digging a hole in the earth and literally screaming your grief and rage into it or turning on music and shaking and weeping your face off. Like something I also really wanted to affirm from the last episode is like our spell work and our self-care is spell work and spell work is art and it is playful and it is simple. And I think that making witchcraft complicated and gatekeeping that and saying there's certain things you have to do in order to be able to do it is also a representation of the witch wound as the sister wound and women like doing what men have done. Because if we act like men, if we do what men have done, then somehow we think we're going to get this power that's been taken from us. But actually, I think the true like embodiment of the witch is like burning all bridges and
bras
and bras, even though our tatas were really up high yesterday, we like went with a different vibe today. I really hope I haven't had a nappy slop on this. Yeah, there's no gatekeeping. There's no gatekeeping. Like witches sit in a circle for a reason because it's representational of there actually being no hierarchy.
Yeah. And I love this idea of exploring your own spells, exploring your own witchcraft, because there's so many connotations with that. Exploring how you would make an altar by connecting into the divine voice within you and following what that looks like. And I mean, I really do respect tradition.
Yeah.
And I really do have a deep respect for the wisdom of our ancestors and the wisdom of those that have come before us. And at the same time, all the knowledge of humans has also resulted in an incredibly violent society that I am not that interested in propagating.
Right.
So it's like, there is room to gather what the ancestors have given us, and there is room to bring your own like essence into it. And I think that is the dance, is educating yourself on what was and then opening yourself up to what is through your own internal voice slash wisdom slash experimentation slash curiosity slash play.
Curiosity. I think it's like replacing fear with curiosity and
Yeah.
replacing fear with reverence. And, you know, I mean, I will just plug the Blood, Bone, and Honey Pot membership and mystery school in this, because this, like, teaching spell work and inviting people into building altars again and letting their self-care be spell work and letting it be play and letting it be art is something that I feel so deeply passionate about, and not having a high barrier of entry
And
to
doing it with community, doing it with friends, doing it with others.
and really experimenting.
Yeah.
Like really experimenting, because for me, like, you know, I shared yesterday, or in our last episode about, it was yesterday in our timeline, I shared in part 1 of this about like the way that I found witchcraft and my tarot practice and my altar building practice in a really dark moment of my life. And it also like was deeply empowering for me to create a practice when I felt dumb and disempowered, or like I just felt like a shell of myself. And I used my practice of witchcraft and my spiritual practice and my curiosity about the witch and the goddess to really help rebuild my sense of self and confidence that had been like pretty racked from a young age.
I mean, I think when I think of the story of
racked.
when I think of the story of Lilith slash Eve, and I think of this idea of disempowerment, you know, I actually don't think anyone can disempower you. We give our power away. We disconnect from our own power, because
even if it's not our fault.
I also do kind of like bristle at the idea of power, because to me, power does imply power over. And I'm not interested in power over. I'm interested in like collaborative communication and co-creation. And I don't really know where power fits into that. But if we're going to have a blanketed definition of power as in your own energy and your own life force and your own sense of self, that is not something that can be taken from you. It is something that can be buried.
Yeah.
You know, when you're a child, you know, people can bury that.
Yeah.
But it's always with you. And I think the witch and Lilith and Eve, these are people, or she is an archetype that's embodying a reconfiguration to her own sense of self slash autonomy slash power, to remind us that we all can connect to that. It is never gone, even if it is under like layers and layers of sediment and volcanic ash. It will always be there. It cannot be destroyed.
And I think we're also just mirroring power structures. Like I'm just seeing the movie The Matrix, and like the plugging in and the taking and the siphoning of energy, and like when I get like a psychic image of what codependency has looked like and felt like for me, or when I've seen it for people I'm channeling for, like it literally does to me look like there's these holes that like these like tubes get plugged into, and the energy is just being vacuumed and sucked out of. But I also believe in this sense of like self-generating, regenerative energy can't be created or destroyed. So even if the energy has been in a pattern of being siphoned and sucked, you can also cut off those tentacles and portals of access, and like balance will be restored. And I think that's something ultimately the witch also believes in, is that like balance and equilibrium like is the truth.
But I mean, we could go on and we should do a codependency podcast, because I would also say that it's not just about someone sucking from you. It's actually
about giving too.
Not even giving, about truly entertaining yourself.
Yeah.
with thinking you can control another people's reaction to you.
Yeah, well, for sure.
And I mean, like I've had to
avoiding discomfort through
I've had to
emotional
talk about
manipulation.
some dark nights of the soul around codependency. Like I have a 40-minute PowerPoint presentation about my history of codependency.
Codependency is cunty. Maybe that's
But even though you feel like the empath and you feel like the kind one,
no, it can be incredibly violent and emotionally manipulative.
But again, if we're going to come back to the witch and the importance of the witch archetype in our own lives and how we connect to the witch archetype, not just as a feminine archetype, not just as a female creature, but as an omniversal energy of sovereignty.
Because the witch and the angels are non-binary.
Because the witch and the angels are non-binary, and non-binary,
and like honestly, we're kind of non-binary,
and it's multi-binary. Like it's multi. I mean, binary is obviously. I think non-binary is the rejection of the two, right? So it is saying that there are like the witch energy is so much deeper than just purely one gender.
Yeah.
That is clear.
Yeah. And it's also true that the majority of people who were burned in the witch trials were women and actually a lot of midwives and herbalists mostly, which I think is very interesting. Women who knew how to deliver babies without the disruption of like medical authority, and women who knew how to heal people without the disruption of medical authority, which is ultimately the church's authority, because like the connection between church and state, yeah, but the connection between the church and the medical industrial complex, now that is something that I'm interested in.
That is another conversation.
It's a whole other potty pod.
Yeah. Okay, do you feel satiated?
I think we should go potty on the earth. I think one of my favorite spells, I want to end this with like just like a spell can be like you literally going to pee on the earth, and when you release your urine, like releasing your guilt, because the kidneys hold guilt according to Chinese medicine. And like all of the organs in our bodies have these energetic properties that you could just like literally research online and start to like write in your journal, and like maybe like color coding the chakras and like building an altar that's red because the root chakra is connected to trust and you're trying to like create more trust in your life. Like I just want to like reinforce that self-care is spell work and spell work is art, and it is inside of us and we know how to do this. And I have to remind myself that like 8,000 times a day when I want to reach for outside authority. So
respect.
Yeah. I think we did it. I'm so wet.
And you're not wearing underwear, and those are my pants.
Or a bra. I really hope there wasn't a nappy slot, but we're going to just...
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
Thank y'all.
Thank y'all.